Hey there, folks. Welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture. And today we're going to be talking about the newest album from K. Michelle called Kimberly, The People I Used to Know. So this is the third K. Michelle record that I will have covered on this show, and at this point I'm questioning why I'm even bothering yet again, beyond the fact that it's the end of 2017, there aren't that many new releases getting added, and these reviews tend to do surprisingly well. And yet, going back to my last review of More Issues in Vogue, I discovered my amusement that I was asking these exact same questions, and yet ultimately made the decision that I would probably wind up covering K. Michelle again. I mean, she's such a powerhouse of blunt personality that I kept venturing back in the hope that there would be some refinement of her writing, or that she'd fix her consistently exasperating production problems. But going into this album, which was promising to be more focused on a vibe-driven R&B sound, I was planning to do so by bringing in Chris Brown and Jeremiah, lovely. I also remembered that for as mostly positive as I have been on K. Michelle's work in the past, I've rarely felt all that compelled to go back to either of the records I've reviewed from her. Now, granted, K. Michelle is enough of a personality that her plans to delve into figures in her past that could be entertaining, if a little bit melodramatic, but that's not exactly bad. She's not one to shy away from airing dirty laundry, and she's normally pretty good at it. But at the same time, it was also over an hour with over 20 songs, and there aren't that many artists who can sustain that sort of creative momentum, even artists I like. And yep, did she manage to surprise me here? Well, honestly, not really. Of course, that's not saying this is a bad release, it's actually pretty decent, but of the three records that I've covered from K. Michelle thus far, this is both the longest and the least essential. Not nearly as imaginative or interesting, or at least overloaded with personality as her previous records have been. And what continues to exasperate me is that all of this is paired with production issues that have not yet been solved record after record, and on a longer album, they get a lot harder for me to ignore. But hey, it's K. Michelle, right? At the core of all this, and she's still a compelling performer. Well, yeah, I guess, but I'm starting to get the impression that if her vocal production or technique doesn't start improving, she should really switch things up. Of course, the big selling point of an album like this is that K. Michelle, she's got a huge range and pipes that she sells with so much raw passion. She's never been subtle, sure, but that firepower has always been one of her strong assets, and it lets me overlook how often she slurs words in her belting, or how her pitch can feel kind of a little sloppy, leaving the auto-tune to clumsily patch things up in post-production. But if that's gonna be the case, it's really inexcusable how often she is peaking in the mix. And considering how much this album draws upon earlier eras of R&B and soul, especially the 90s, you would think that her producers would have learned the right techniques by now. It's been 3 or 4 albums. And no, just tacking on more reverb is not a solution. Compare this to when K. Michelle actually starts rapping on this album, dropping verses on Alert and Crazy Like You. And not only is her lyrical construction and flow remarkably solid, she's got plenty of the charisma to make her convincing behind the microphone. Hell, if you're not gonna give her the opulent, expensive production that she really needs and the budget to sell her style of R&B and soul, you know what? Strip it back, let her rap, and I'd probably put more money on her being even more successful, even in the mainstream. I'd certainly take her over Jeremiah doing his Travis Scott impression on Takes Two, or Chris Brown being utterly irrelevant on Either Way, and that song wasn't that good to begin with. Unfortunately, if you were looking for a consistent style of production to match K. Michelle on this album, I'm not sure this record is for you either, because that doesn't really happen. She's always had a liking for some of the smoother tones that were prevalent in the 90s, but as I have said time and time again, to make that sound feel organic and lush, you need producers with a deft touch that is definitely not here. The subtlety doesn't translate to production. Even if I will give credit to the string sections and some of the gleaming keyboard lines that show up to complement the groove on tracks like Make the Song Cry or No Not You, or the hilariously overwrought Brain on Love. And yes, we will be coming back to that one. Now, granted, on the flip side, you get songs that try for a little bit more of that opulent vibe, like the sample of Earned It by The Weeknd that shows up on Giving Up on Love. It's a gratuitous sample choice if there ever was one, but it gets far more atonal and grating on Either Way, or is chopped into these knocking, muddy fragments on Kim K. And again, if K. Michelle wanted to make hip-hop, there are some decent beats here. Alert might be pretty sparse, but it's effective as an opener, and the watery trap skitters on Crazy Like You, they're certainly more flattering for her rap verse than the oversold sung chorus. And I have to come back to this, a big part of how much you will find find these songs tolerable is whether or not they have the atmosphere to handle K. Michelle's vocals properly, which is why the spacious, hollow trap knock of Rounds or the scratchy soul piano ballad Woman of My Word, they mostly work. I will say God Loves Sex and Drugs and Takes Two, they try to bring in guitar foundation with live bass that is welcome, but it's not like this record is allowed to pick up any sort of real organic flavor or texture, and instead just drowns them out in reverb. And that's before you get the outright pop songs on this album that do try to bring in a little bit more acoustic tones in order to match the strings, like on Heaven or Run Don't Walk. The latter was written by Kelly Clarkson, and man, you can tell. And while I'm not saying K. Michelle can't handle these songs, they're definitely a tone that feels kind of jarring with the rest of this record and don't exactly work for her vocal strengths. But really, the larger problem is when you have songs like Not a Little Bit and All I Got on More Issues Than Vogue with some of her best ever hooks. I'm not hearing what on this record can compete with them in terms of that hook quality. And that takes us to a lot of the content. And again, K. Michelle, she's not a subtle artist, and all the spoken word interludes that she peppers this record with make that abundantly clear that she's coming to acceptance as an untouchable, unrelatable figure even as she vents some of her feelings. And she's looking to set all of her affairs in order to transcend the rest of all the petty drama. And I can't be the only one who thinks it's just the wrong artistic choice for her, right? I mean, one of the main reasons I will ever listen to a K. Michelle record is the diva-driven melodrama. That's half the appeal. And even here, one of the main cathartic thrills behind songs like Alert and Crazy Like You is watching her engage in some ruthless disses, or the sex-hungry flexing of Rounds, and the 3-minute interlude aptly called Fuck Your Man. Now, granted, there's a part of me that wishes that she would at least try to elevate some of this melodrama into territory that shows a little bit more thought, like on Make This Song Cry, where she's trying to get us to buy into her anger that she didn't cheat on her ex-partner, and that was such a struggle for her. Yeah, I'm not really sympathetic. Or take Kim K, which wanted to try to call out the Kardashians for whitewashing and appropriation of black culture, but the intended sarcasm on the hook doesn't really quite land, as you can tell that she just wants all the privileges and freedoms to be just as terrible as they are and just be as successful. And that's the thing. K. Michelle is, on a fundamental level, as a performer and a songwriter, pretty damn earnest and straightforward, so sarcasm doesn't really work for her, and it's why the heartbreak of No Not You actually connects, or her frank admission of the mess of whatever relationship is to come on Heaven kind of connects, or even the slight moment of maturity on Run Don't Walk, where she encourages that ex to go back to the partner that they truly loved. That actually works for me. But at the same time, it exposes two major weak points in her writing. The first being that above it all coolness is not a convincing weapon in her arsenal, which is why Talk to God and its shots at internet gossip and Instagram models backbiting against her, it falls really flat. Now, the second and slightly more embarrassing weakness comes in that her directness can lead to songs that just feel clumsy or really overwrought without foundation, like her wants for God Loves Sex and Drugs in as blunt language as possible, or the hyper-sincere Brain on Love, which if you grew up in the 90s, you might not be able to dissociate from that Rachel Lee Cook ad about your brain on drugs, and suddenly becomes pretty damn hilarious and in the wrong way. But look, as a whole, I said at the end of my last review that I'd be interested in covering more K. Michelle records, but this one really pushed my limit here. The production quality is haphazard at best, and it rarely flatters her as much as it really should, which can blunt the impact of writing that starts to ring as a little bit stale, not nearly as imaginative, and a performer that isn't exactly evolving in ways that work for her skill set. And given that this runs over an hour and doesn't really have the dramatic muscle or unique storytelling to earn it, yeah, light 6 out of 10, really only for fans at this point. Otherwise, there's other R&B and soul records that dropped this year that are more tightly written and interestingly composed. It's worth a listen beyond that, but really, not a lot more. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. If you'd like to like and subscribe, I'd be more than grateful. I know K. Michelle fans, I know this is supposed to be her grand artistic statement, but I was not wowed by this. Any interconnecting theme felt pretty thin at best. But if you want to buy it, links in the description below, and I got the poll up there for y'all tell me how wrong I am. Beyond that, anything else I might be able to do to improve my presentation, I'm all ears. If you guys want to get involved in my scheduling process now that Patreon's figured out their issues, link to my Patreon's right over there, where 3 times a week you guys get to vote on my schedule, and once a week for the higher tier contributors, you guys get to add albums, movies, or even a top 10 list to that schedule. More details right over there. I'm really happy you guys have stuck with me thus far. There will be some changes coming for 2018, but till then, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.